Here's the answer for day 2. Find all solutions of the equation in the intervals 0 to 2 pi. Question A. Here's our equation. I noticed that it's a binomial and there's a cosecant of x in both terms. So let's try some factoring. And this will create secant x minus 2 is equal to 0. Now that we have the product of two factors is equal to 0, we can apply the zero product property that we've used a lot this year. Cosecant x is equal to 0, or secant x minus 2 is equal to 0. Next, I'm going to change from cosecant into sine. So if the cosecant of x is equal to 0, then the sine of x is 1 over 0, or undefined. Now right here, I'm going to add 2 to both sides, getting secant of x is equal to 2, and then change the secant function into the cosine function, getting cosine of x is equal to 1 over 2. Now let's solve both of these for x. We'll focus on this first one. On the interval from 0 to 2 pi, what values of x have a sine value that's undefined? None of them do, because all x values in this interval have a sine value. Now we'll look right here. On the interval from 0 to 2 pi, what value of x has a cosine value of 1/2? So look on the unit circle for all of the angles where the cosine is 1/2. That occurs at pi over 3 and at 5 pi over 3. And so these two values of x solve this equation. Now question B. Let's make this equation equal to 0 like the first one was by subtracting the 2 and subtracting the cosine x. This will create 2 sine squared x minus cosine x minus 2 is equal to 0. Next, it's complicated that there's a sine and a cosine in the equation. Let's replace sine squared x with an equivalent expression that involves cosine. That expression is 1 minus cosine squared x. To get this, I used that one identity that was sine squared x plus cosine squared x equals 1. Next, let's distribute the 2. Next, observe that the 2 minus the 2 cancels out, leaving just those two terms there, and that those two terms both have a cosine x in them. So we can factor out the GCF. Now that we've created a product of two factors equal to 0, we can apply the zero product property. The first equation will be cosine of x is equal to 0, or in the other equation would be negative 2 cosine x minus 1 equals to 0. This first one is ready to go because it only has the single trig function. We need to do a little bit of work on this. Let's add the 1 over to the right side. Then divide by the negative 2. And that creates cosine x is negative 1/2. Now let's do the inverse cosine on both of these equations to get the x alone. So the inverse cosine of 0. What angles in the interval 0 to 2 pi have a cosine value of 0? There are 2 of them. That occurs at pi over 2 and at 3 pi over 2. Now over here, in the interval from 0 to 2 pi, what angles have a cosine value of negative 1/2? There will be 2 of those. They're at 2 pi over 3 and at 4 pi over 3. So these 4 angle measures solve the equation.